So this session is about the Linaro release process. It was called on by Alexander because to kind of transfer some knowledge, because we're going to get a new release manager, which is Fabi over there. Say that. As you all probably know, my name is Jamie Bennett. I'm the current release manager, but in a couple of weeks I'll be leaving. So the aims of this session are basically to explain the release process as it is currently today, to transfer a bit of that knowledge, and to invite suggestions on how we can improve it. Well, of course it's perfect. So. And then Alexander's got some thoughts on how we can change to a more agile process for next cycle, I hope.
I have thoughts. Wow. Okay.
So all I was going to do in this is basically point everybody to the required information for releases and for cycles. There's so much information, and you'll see on the Etherpad there, there's lots and lots of links.
How's that the cycle statement of 6 months square with what George said?
Exactly. So we'll just go through briefly how it's been up until now, and then going forward, we want a more agile approach, possibly a monthly release, and with Android, of course, they don't adhere to the Ubuntu release schedule anyway. So there's definitely going to have to be some changes. But as you can see we'll just go through the links. Please shout out lots of questions. So the first of the links is where, if you're interested in the release cycle, you start here, and it's wiki.linaro.org/cycles. And off of this, most of the good information is. So, as Dave said, we release twice a year, in May and November, which is traditionally 1 month exactly after Ubuntu. Reasons for that are some political, some technical, but basically we get a month's worth of goodness from Ubuntu, the fixes, the updates into our images before we release. It does cause some problems sometimes, as Kate will probably tell you, but it seems to work, or it has done for the last 2 cycles. So, off of this page, you can see that to get the images, and when I say images, we currently do 5 different images. The 2 MEBs, which are the Linaro evaluation builds, which are our blessed builds. These are the ones that we want up to a very high standard. We want them as tested as possible, and these are the ones that we're going to be showcasing. The other 3 images, the Nano Developer and ALIP, are convenience images for our developers. So, as it says there, Nano Small Developer Tools. ALIP is an ARM derivative distribution where it came originally from ARM, and when we adopted it. So this is just basically X. It's a low footprint X, or it should be, when it's eventually finished, for developers doing web and GUI tools. So going up a little bit, we have these links here on how you can test, and I encourage everybody to test if they have hardware. We traditionally have difficulty in getting people to test manually in the community, but it is very, very simple to do, and just clicking any of these. There's a step-by-step process here that if you have hardware you can go through, and it handholds you into basically testing and, let me resize this, and being able to submit your results to our own QA tracker, our own ISO tracker equivalent for Ubuntu. So going back to this, currently to install an Android image is slightly different, and again, the wiki pages and the link in the Etherpad will show you how to do it. It's very similar. It's a similar tool to installing the ARM images, and again, it's step by step on how you can do that. And currently, Android builds for Panda and for Beagle XM. So moving on to Again, one of the links that is in Etherpad is a link to a document which tells you all about the Linaro release cycle. It looks a little bit like this, it's PDF. It'll tell you all the stages of the cycle, explain a lot of things, and the only reason I put it up here is just to show you how the UDS has changed. This is going back to Brussels before Linaro was around, and I think there was less than 300 people there. So it's quite a contrast from today. Okay, so as part of the release cycle, we obviously get a lot of input into the images, into our development. And to tie all this together and to have a dashboard of where you can go and see these things, we created something called status.linaro.org, and this was James who did some great work on this. And this is currently what it looks like. This brings in all the work items, visualizes them, and makes it easy to see what's going into the images, what's planned to be in the images, and to basically say what the status is of a particular thing that you're interested in. It's not specifically for the images themselves, but all the things that will be going into there on the Linaro side you will find here. So if we move on to what this cycle looks like. So this is the 11.05 cycle for us. Obviously Ubuntu's already had the 11.04. Just off the wiki here we have cycles 11.05. You'll see if you put 11.11 you get the same sort of format for the next cycle. So currently this cycle, this is the information for here. You can see at the bottom of this page the milestones that have already been released, explanations about what's exactly in these images. So for instance, we've just recently had a beta 2. You'll see what's supported in these images, some highlight bullet points, and we have an errata, some issues there. We also have on there a diff between the different releases, so you can see exactly what's gone in from, say, Alpha 1 to Alpha 2. Please throw questions if there's any.
What's your plan after it comes out? Are you basically going to do updates and fix stuff that comes out or not?
After it comes out, if a milestone comes out, no, we carry on to all fixes going to the next milestone, and after a final release, we don't traditionally do SIUs or any updates. We tend to move on, but I think there's plans in the next cycle to maybe accommodate that kind of model.
How long do you have to hold the images until they've been removed?
At the moment, we hold all images, so we don't get rid of them. So yeah, today you can get the very first images we produced. The actual snapshots and daily images, James will tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 6 weeks, something like that.
Today and when we run out of disk space.
Yeah, basically, for daily images, when we run out of disk space, we start deleting things. But the release images will always be there. This is the schedule for this cycle. Mirrors very similar to the Ubuntu release cycle. The same sort of milestones are there, but they're supplemented by Linaro only things. So you'll get this kind of this sign-off technical requirements, which is the third one down, which is a Linaro only thing really. But if you know the Ubuntu cycle, this will be familiar to you. The only difference this cycle we had between Ubuntu and Linaro was a beta 2 at a different day. Purely because we took the goodness, that was the Linaro release day image, we wrapped it up and made a beta 2. Next week we have a release candidate, and then the week after is our final release, which Fabi will be doing. There's a smile on his face. So our images are built differently to the Ubuntu images. We use a light helper based build system which is called Offspring. And today, with some help with the infrastructure team, we have our own instance with Panda boards building release images. And anybody can go to offspring.linaro.org today, and you'll see exactly what's being built in the form of hardware packs, which are then combined with rootfs file systems to make a complete image.
That's not what we release yet.
This is not what we're using today, but come next cycle, it will be all off of offspring.linaro.org. We use an internal system which we piggybacked off of a canonical group, and they kindly let us use their system, and we switched to having our own, which is this one, for next cycle. But you get an idea of the interface. You can click through any of these things. You can the red tag on the Ubuntu desktop build tells you it's not building at the moment, and you can go through and see why it's not building. So moving on to actually where our images go after they've been built. All our images go to snapshots.linaro.org. Currently, the 5 that we really care about, the 2 LEVs and the 3 developer images. This is just an example of today's image for Ubuntu desktop. You'll see all the files that are in there, but the ones that you're very interested in is the tar.gz for building the image, which would be combined with a hardware pack, which you can get from the Linaro-hardware pack directory. And you can see all the boards there that we support. I think currently is 11, if I'm counting them. So it's quite a feat. When we're about to release a milestone build, we take a good known daily and we ask the community to test. We have our own testing, automated testing, which is at validation.linaro.org, but I think that should be dashboard.linaro.org eventually, is it, James?
Yeah.
Okay. But you'll see on here, if you go digging through, you'll see some automated testing on Panda, on Beagle, with various test suites, just boot tests to see if it gets to a console, and you can see where it passed or failed. So the third one down here, for example, is a Beagle board. It's an A-lit image, where it says on the root file system, and you can see that it had 8 failures for a PostX test suite. So combine that with our manual testing, which we do prior to a milestone, and we do have a weekly testing initiative as well. You get a good feel of how good the images are. And going back to QA Tracker, you can see the results from community testing for Beta 2, which is there. The bugs are on the right-hand side, the amount of tests on the left.
How is the process of deciding which board to support in the release been done?
Currently for LEBs, they have to be of a certain standard, and there's documentation on the wiki which basically says what is required to be an LEB. This is our blessed, it's all supported, it's all singing and dancing. So if it meets that requirement, and for instance we need physical hardware and a certain amount of it, if it meets that requirement, then it can be adopted. The landing teams are obviously got a remit to produce certain hardware packs to support certain boards for their development. But we can say that's fine, we've got the infrastructure to build that, but we won't bless them, we won't say they're great images, but you'll see them in the hardware pack directory.
But is there any look ahead, like for example, starting a cycle, in the midst of a cycle, there is new boards coming into the market. Is there anything to that, like 3 months down the road, it's going to be new board that's going to come and be available in the market? Do we ever look ahead like that? Or no?
Yeah, we do, but the support for boards comes from the partners, so it's what the partners really care about. And if they care about, for instance, Snowball, which is coming, then they tell us they care about that. They give us a certain amount of hardware, and they give us certain parts of software components to enable us to build images for it. We don't go actively out and say, oh, this looks really good, let's make a hardware pack and let's build for it. It comes the other way. It's when demand is there, we'll make a pack and an image for it.
For the manual, for the automated testing, do you have established baselines or features of power plan architectures in terms of results you're expecting?
Baselines themselves?
No.
Okay.
So at the moment, it's in its infancy. The infrastructure's there. We can see the baseline just from the results we're getting recently. But yeah, to say whether they're good or bad, we don't really know. Obviously, there's known test suites, and if they pass or fail, then that's
So you're
obvious.
basically at 100% coverage on the known test suites that you've got there right now, as opposed to a certain percentage of known failures that you
Right, it'll need more analysis to say what is acceptable failures and what's not. But
Okay.
yeah, I think this cycle it'll really come to fruition, and you'll see this used a lot more. Okay. So where was I? So when our known good image, which is usually a couple of days before a milestone release happens, we take a snapshot. We take the images from snapshots.linaro.org, we put them onto releases.linaro.org, and we ask the community to really manually test these while we're validating them in the validation file as well. 2 days is usually a good lead time for the audience we have. We don't have a massive community testing, so we don't have to coordinate a lot of things coming back in. And in 2 days gives us time to respin if we really need to. So,
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do you have basically a known list of people you work with for testing and it's tracked somewhere specifically?
right, we have, yeah,
Floating.
we have an internal list of what hardware people have,
Okay.
and we can quite easily push their managers come release times to get them to test. But that's the nature of Linaro, is that the hardware is so limited that we basically have to go to the person to say test rather than put it out there and hope that also testing comes back in. So if an acceptable amount of bugs come back, because there's always going to be bugs on the images, then we basically announce it to the world, and the images for the milestones will be found on releases.linaro.org. This is an example of Ubuntu desktop, and you can see we only started doing it at Alpha 3. But you can always click latest, and you get the very similar mirror to what snapshots.linaro.org is for that day. So you can see we took the 26th of the 4th image for beta 2. And if you go to QA tracker again, you can see these bugs for beta 2 testing were deemed okay for beta 2 milestone. This is more for people.
Sorry, one question. So how long does the testing take usually?
For milestones, we're usually 2 days before release for testing. We have a weekly tested initiative which is on every Thursday. If you read Linaro Dev, you'll see emails on there for a kind of call for help. So we know kind of where the images are going to be. So 2 days before a milestone is usually enough. We have been known to respin several times on the day of release because of a final last bug. But that's the exception rather than the norm.
Did you have to do it this cycle?
Yes, we did it once this time. Towards the, one of the alphas it was. And this is a step-by-step process of exactly what goes on. Basically what I explained 2 days before, we set up the infrastructure, we copy the images across, we start making release notes, and then obviously on the day of release, we make a big fuss of it. I encourage everybody, if they're interested in the release process, to dig around the links on Etherpad, but this one's a particularly good one. It's process/development cycle. It goes through how we get input into the images, into the release cycle. It shows you how we capture in various documents the requirements for the cycle itself. This is slightly out of date in the fact that we've only just started to move to a more agile monthly release kind of process, but it's still relevant information. And again, I just encourage you to read it if it interests you. One of the other things that's very important to know, and this is on the Ubuntu side as well, is there's milestone. When you work with Ubuntu images and the Ubuntu archive, there's milestones, there's freezes, there's dates where you need to be doing certain things and where you shouldn't be doing things. So we have kind of a mirror of the Ubuntu sort of documentation where we, under process cycle, it explains exactly what each milestone means. And if we go back to cycle, on the right hand side there, you see links to the explanation of exactly what an Alpha 1 release is, exactly what an import freeze is, and so on and so forth. So we're running out of time, so there's always more discussion. But again, I'm leaving, but a lot of the things that I got together for release management, such as tools and so on, and things like that, can be found on my Launchpad page under the code. It's called Release and Project Management. There's things for bug tracking, comparison of images, getting the download statistics to produce metrics and things. So that's another good link. I'll rush through this. Oh, I'm just going to show the top images. This is the other end of the fruits of our labour. This is what's being downloaded. So at the top bar chart here is our snapshots. This is what people want to download on a daily basis. So it seems that ALIP is the one that people test daily, mostly. And that's quite a... You would have thought maybe they want the smallest of images, but it seems people want graphical images. And then come release time,
What timeline
everybody's...
is that made from?
Sorry?
What timeline is that made from?
This is up until last month for this
From-
cycle.
For this whole cycle.
So looking at just the releases, the milestones themselves, it
I
seems
mean,
like
because we recently started pulling in ALIP into our validation lab.
yeah, which is probably
Might be one
a
reason.
chunk as well.
Because we want an extra contributor. Up until recently, dashboard, the back end, was actually pulling images from public places, and the most commonly pulled image is ALIP.
There you go.
So we have a very active user.
Yes. For milestones themselves, it seems that people are very interested in the Ubuntu desktop, and you can see the big slice there. So finally, before we, this is. Do you want to show this, or is this out of date still?
No.
Okay. So going forward, there's a view that we should release more often. We should do component releases, which is the toolchain, kernels, all the other bits and pieces that make up images on a monthly basis. And to complement that, we should possibly do monthly image releases, because Android itself is on a completely different release cycle to Ubuntu.
You
So
have the Android picture as well.
yeah,
Can you put them beneath each other?
I'm trying to resize them. So yeah, so we're not tied to one release cycle. So So refining the release cycle at the moment is fine for us as well. That's not going to be big enough, is it? Hey,
Click the other one beyond.
there you go. So the top one's Ubuntu, the bottom one's the Android. Do you want to say anything about this?
Yes, so I'll just start. So yes, it's true. The idea is to generate across the board, move to kind of monthly releases. What that means concretely for our distribution images is not 100% defined yet. But here's one vision how it would work. So for Android, it's clear we cannot work on a development release. We cannot work tightly together with upstream. As for the Android project on the next version of the release. So the only chance we have is we basically work on top of the last stable release. There, it's very simple. We release monthly updates. There are a few phases in there. You can read them up on the wiki page if you want to know the details, but it's basically when Android releases, from there on, we will release once a month an image for our LUV hardware and for those that might become LUVs at some point. For Ubuntu, it's a bit tricky, the situation. We discussed this for quite a while. What should we do? We do monthly. We want monthly releases, but in the end, it doesn't really map that well, because we could do the same. We could say we work only on existing, on the last stable release, and we integrate our working group output there. We integrate new landing team hardware packs into that and release on a monthly basis. But that is kind of, while it looks nice on the whiteboard, the problem is that this would put us in a situation where either the working groups or would work on something that is old. So they wouldn't work on the latest trunk software, which is constantly flowing into the Ubuntu development release. Or it would mean they work on trunk, and we cannot integrate everything unless we make serious backporting effort in the platform, for instance, all the time, which is considered also waste for us, saying we don't want to work for the past, we want to work for the future. So this had to be balanced kind of bit, and what we discussed, and I think this was basically the last agreed approach from was to say, yes, we have two branches, so for the development release we will continue to work closely with Ubuntu, the working groups will continue to work on trunk, we will ensure that whatever they do flows into Ubuntu, most likely in a monthly kind of heartbeat, because that's when...
We're already sort of in a monthly heartbeat right now.
What?
Yeah.
So our working groups release the components in a monthly heartbeat, and our platform would come and push that into Ubuntu until there's freeze, basically. From there on, we probably just either put them in the PPA or try to SRU them, or just leave them alone and say, well, it's not exciting enough, it's not worth the effort to integrate it. But well, so basically working group outputs flow monthly into the next development release from Ubuntu, and we basically get the automatic release cycle from the Ubuntu projects that we had before. Basically all those alpha milestones, all those beta milestones, and RCs and so on. On top, we also want to allow monthly releases basically of updated hardware support for the last stable release. So that's basically the compromise. And your upstream development goes into the development release, and the hardware support coming from the landing team goes into the development release and the last stable release, and that's basically where we would make real monthly releases from. So we allow our landing teams to produce monthly updates to their LEB images and get better hardware support, maybe earn another star and so on, get closer to production and can better showcase it. In turn, we said, well, we don't want all those milestones that Ubuntu is actually doing and put so much effort into testing on our side and so on, because it stretches our whole process too far. And also, it's kind of not really a release for us if we release an alpha milestone, because that's something that consumers or our members and product builders can actually not use anyway. I mean, it's basically just a projection to showcase what will happen if you basically don't do your work, if you don't give us new hardware support, then you can probably say, around beta time of Ubuntu, you can show them, look, your hardware regressed completely, you have no graphics acceleration anymore, and so on. So we came up with saying, we just do basically 3 milestones at most. Well, one we call alpha, which would be around beta time from Ubuntu, one that is beta, which would be the release of Ubuntu, and one of our final release in the public. So that's the story basically we have here. It probably might change, it would just be 2 communicated milestones of the development release that we really announce and tell this is something that gives you the preview, but in general that's it. And if you go back to this table, do you have this table as a whole, this whole release process table with all the dates and so on?
Schedule.
But it's kind of a busy place, right? And this is what will be considerably cleaned up. And you see there's also some ideas in it that we actually have now with our new star rating and so on. We have like BSP code deadline, we have board support review in there. So it was all kind of already in there. And
I wish we did this.
yeah, right. And we now propose reduce the milestones we do there in the development release, but we do them right. So we say at our alpha milestone release, we do a board review rating and tell them this is how it stands, and you completely don't qualify for becoming LEB because you just had 1 star. You might be close to 3 stars, which will give you an official LEB stamp at the end. Continue working on it and you stay in the candidate list.
And I love the Ubuntu team to actually be the ones that gave us input into that said, yeah, this looks like something which is good enough for us to call Ubuntu, and this is something that's not good enough for us to call Ubuntu.
So let me really finish this, so to say, just to make the process clear. And then for our beta release, which was kind of Ubuntu final, we would say now it's time to take a look what is really the truth. And then if somebody really doesn't meet those deadlines, they will fall out of the final race. The rest of the boards that we are confident they will make it, we will make some official LEB boards, and this means that from there on all the hardware bugs and so on become release critical bugs for us. So we will basically commit to work hard with landing teams to get those fixed and to get them in place for the final release. So they definitely will be LEB releases. Go ahead.
So one thing then is if you've got that extended period, you'll be using your release carrying forward and with your development monthly cycles. If you're finding bugs, are you going to flag them so they go back into our release?
So that's an interesting approach. So to not spread too far, we actually said, well, we only do hardware pack updates for landing teams. So only the hardware support level, which is not really anything that probably is critical for you. I mean, of course,
Well,
I mean,
but the kernel's not used elsewhere, is it?
it's improvement for people. It's improvement. It suddenly means it's not like an SNU thing. Suddenly, previously, there was no graphics acceleration. It was just frame buffer, and we make suddenly an update where graphics acceleration works. That doesn't qualify
You're not
for
going
it.
to do that after you release them.
We allow the
You're not
landing
going to do that
team.
in the last month.
Yeah, but
No, so sorry. I'm talking about the monthly hardware pack updates that people are allowed to get in if they want against a stable release. The landing teams, the opt-in ability to update hardware packs against the last stable release from landing teams.
Will they be doing that just via a PPA, or are we going to try to do an SRE kernel for them?
That's
That's
really what the
right.
question is.
That's what you want to know. Yes, we will try. So use. I mean, that's what we'll try. I mean, but it depends. I mean, what it is, right? Maybe the kernel we use was actually never in the archive initially for the LEB. So
Well, ideally.
ideally,
The ideal
yes.
position is that the kernel is in the archive, and for OMEP, for instance, it's a yes.
Yes,
For others,
it's probably not for
the
us.
thing is that if it doesn't make it into the archive, is there a good chance that it actually will make a good LEB?
Yes, there's because the LEB has this notion of saying we're a bit more flexible. We want to show over time how decent. If you follow upstream, if you always on the latest kernel version of your mainline, you will see your stars almost never regress. But we call them out and tell them, look, you can give us also a kernel that is a bit older, 1 or 2 releases. If that's better at the moment to get the stuff going, we put it
Why
into
should
the
that stop
release.
us from going to the archive? We put kernels in the archive which were versions older.
Then the security updates and so on, they don't like us anymore. Then, right? I mean, the security update stuff.
Like I say, we're updating the kernels all the time on the SNU side.
Well, the problem is that,
We don't do the security updates. That's
yeah,
all.
that's one thing.
We buy all the sauce from Ubuntu.
But what if it's an old kernel, different API?
No.
So how long?
So
We
you
have all the updates on a particular version that Ubuntu has.
Right, but the question is, what if,
let's say 50 I and find out the certified BSP kernel is the best we can currently get. It's so good.
well, let's just use a scenario. So let's say somebody like MediaTek joins, right? And they have a board, and they look at what's, they give us the board, they say, look, we have good support, but it's 2636. And let's say,
And they even come after our release and what.
and they say, oh, we'll put a landing team, we'll try and forward put all this stuff, but let's say it doesn't get done, right? And you have, so at the end, you have a 2636 based kernel that you won't apply kernel source to it.
No.
And so that's the question, that's the question that Alexander is asking. In that situation, would this kernel be in the archive? Should be put in the archive.
Realistically, your kernel starting point is zero in your archives. You're not basically putting in someone else's kernel. You're basically basing off the kernel points that's already been released, and that stays core, things go into it on the Ubuntu side.
I guess
You're only
that's,
going to be doing it for a 3-month period.
No, I know.
That's what I was saying.
I guess that's the misunderstanding. In this case, the scenario that I'm describing here, we would be taking another kernel which comes from outside.
So this would be strictly a landing kernel with no.
So-
No, but it can
Right, but I mean,
have
just
the
this
same-
whole release process, we don't talk only about Ubuntu, we talk about LEBs, and they explicitly have the ability to pull in stuff that might be better on the hardware support side, but not be so good. Revolve the latest version and be compatible and mainline and stuff. So, and this would be tricky to maintain in the archive. But I mean, for stuff that is really mainline and that we took as the best LEB kernel, we probably would update if people want to. I mean, so that's the thing.
But I mean, for those different kernels, we already kind of have those in the archive already. For example, if you get an A900, is a certified kernel and is
Yeah.
is in a universe and it's not a main, but still.
Right. Right. But then the landing team might say, we now managed to get even more support into the 38 kernel, and they want to update that. Then we probably don't consider making SRU, but it probably will not go in, or I mean, whoever blocks it. So we try SRU if possible, otherwise we do it.
Okay, it sounds like it's realistic.
Right.
I get together with you, basically using diagramming.
Sure, I mean, it's not that easy to get right on the
No,
first
I-
thing.
I-
The Ubuntu story is
I-
like, this is diverged thing, where like the development release, where all the work flows in.
Before you lock yourselves down, I wanted to have a chance to basically have a discussion back and forth to see if we can maximize the cross coverage.
Sure, I mean, we can talk as much as possible.
Right, but I guess the point that Kate's making is that Ubuntu, if it's lucky, it can take a lot of the enablement that we're doing in Linaro, and so Kate wants to make sure that she can do SRUs for Ubuntu on
Okay,
the stuff.
so you will help. Good. Sure. Right, and that's basically it. And I want to fold those. We saw the development releases basically go back those two milestones, and I want to fold them together with our star ratings, which basically is basically the board review. And we have those two levels. First cut, cutting out the stuff that will never make it at Alpha 1. Then second cut at Beta, cutting out the stuff that didn't even manage to catch up. So, and then the rest become release critical bugs, and we really go for it and release, final release. So, but not to be confused, those development releases are not monthly releases. It's just the alpha and the beta is even not something consumable by product builders. It's just to communicate to the landing teams, to the world, you are on track to get an LEB stamp on, or you get not on track to get an LEB stamp on.
And you wouldn't publish them?
What?
And you wouldn't publish it off the
We publish them as beta and alpha releases. I mean, I hope if you communicate it clearly, then people understand it. We still do those monthly updates where we allow landing teams to opt into updating the hardware packs. What I discussed, what I think is the case here, for instance, something that misses a cut at beta, but they say, well, okay, we will not be in the 11.05 release, we will not have an LEB, but they say, yes, we are so close, we are sure in 2 months we will have it, and then they opt in, they say, we want to start the process, we work with them, we get the kernel integrated, we continue testing it, and then we make for them like a mini spin release every month. And we continue releasing monthly together with the Android images, and if nothing changes because nobody opts into updates, that's also fine for Ubuntu. So keep it simple. And on the root file system, that's I expect almost no changes.
So no SRUs?
Most likely, because there's lots of testing and so on. I think the only changes where we would do something is something really considerably comes out of our working groups, and they worked on the right code base. There's no backporting, basically. Like for instance, Unity, Lux.
Well, it could be a bug fix as well.
Or a really important bug fix that is really important for us.
Yeah, so if you're finding bug fixes on the SRU side in the root file system space, how do we handle that as if you're finding them, it's pretty likely that unless it's specific to a hardware issue, an interaction to graphics or something like that, it's affecting us.
Okay.
So can you be tagging it so you can see it as well and have the option to move the attach it to the post?
Yeah.
So this is a question. It's open. I'm really open to discuss this. The monthly updates from now, I said, let's make it simple and say we don't actually update the root file system at all for those releases. Just keep it fixed. So basically it means we don't get SRUs. We could say we keep the validation running for the old release. We free-write the SRU process with Ubuntu and risk that we might not have a stable root FS. And that's the point when we do this monthly hardware back update. That's a risk, and then we would have to work with Ubuntu to stabilize it. We could also say, if we stick to the state, to whatever was at 11.05, right? It's a bit more than stable. We stick to what is there. We keep it unmodified. If something important comes up or a bug comes up, we go through compose into SRU, and we do this one-time effort to cherry pick it into our stable root file system without tracking full SRU updates. So I think this needs some thoughts and discussions and maybe experiments. We could keep basically for now with the rootfs updating with stable updates and see what happens if it goes in the validation file and so on.
Okay.
Right. Good. So this is about the other release site. I hope someone noted everything down so I don't need to repeat it all over again. The one thing I wanted to say, actually, which this was cool that you actually showed this ISO tracker.
Somebody taking notes actually?
I hope so.
No?
Well,
Whose session is this?
James.
Most of it was it's part of the documentation you already know. So
You're
yeah.
fired.
This happens with guys that want to leave. They completely drop, the performance drops to the floor. But,
No, I'm just explaining exactly what's already there and where to find it.
Okay, that's very
There's nothing new.
but where is all this stuff? I mean, I'm talking so many cool things here.
It's all,
Where's the
it's
cool-
all linked there.
No, they pointed,
That's not bad.
like Kate pointed out some of her concerns around the SRE
I'm
process.
taking notes on mine.
Very
Right,
good.
and it's not all,
Please put it on there as well. Then.
and it's not all there about the new process. That is right.
Okay,
The new process, the links are there.
action items.
Right, but not about the stable hardware pack updates. This is not documented really, but we can update it. I mean, I have it in my head.
Okay, but you're still fired.
Okay.
You're
That's
blocked.
good.
You will be blocked.
Yeah, we can
You're not
make-
fired. You're not fired. You're blocked. You cannot come back anymore. So one thing. Go to this ISO tracker, please. And this is what actually. And can you open the star rating page?
The star rating page.
Oh my god.
Do we really want to do
That
that?
was a really part, but that was
Now comes
the session.
the big giant.
really starts.
What's it under?
It's you put it somewhere. It's board support. It's not on the platform. It's on the process for whatever
It's
reason.
okay. You'll do that link.
I'm not sure. There it is. Cycles.
That was moved to cycles, doesn't it?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have a table yet. It must have already added a table somewhere.
What's that?
So those stars that you see there, those are basically back from a matrix that gives you basically a bunch of components that have to work to achieve a certain star rating, right? So we have something like a SD card and so on. This would be kind of a big table, and each of those components that we actually consider to calculate the star rating would even be back with individual tests beneath it.
So
Can you
these are some of the
envision that in
requirements.
your head?
Is this star rating is going to be public outside? It's going to be
Yes.
internal?
It will be public. I will just do it.
It's all public.
It's all public, it's public site right now.
Yeah.
But it's not a
We
real.
have no issue with that.
Nobody has an issue.
No,
Everybody has issues,
We're
but it's
not
like,
gonna ask people if they have issues
That's
about
right.
it.
we want to challenge them.
No
I think they should rather improve the star rating than complain that we publish them.
Sorry, you need to be fairly objective in order for us to be successful.
Yes, we make it objective. That's why the platform unit does it, not the landing tools. Right, I mean, so envision the star rating. is really hard.
like this, haven't
No, no, no.
So,
I think,
so-
I
many
guess
links.
the other thing I'm gonna ask is, you know, the the certification team in Ubuntu basically got the same.
Oh, come on.
issues, and
I
they
have so many things to do. I cannot.
No, it's asking if the same definitions are used.
Are using the same definitions?
No, this is still in draft.
This is still in draft.
This is still in draft.
So
We
it
drafted
doesn't
it.
make sense to basically talk to the Ubuntu hardware certification team and kind of put in their action.
Do they have
plan.
ARM?
We have other motivations. We have really other motivations.
Do they have ARM?
We don't want to
Yeah,
make customers
we had a
happy.
session that we're trying
We
to
want to
see
see
what
customers
was needed for the ARM builds. And,
But what about a criteria for acceptance? Do they have that sort of thing?
I'm happy to talk to them and see what how they rate this stuff, but I think we have other motivations, so please note
We
that
may have
down.
different motivations, but it'd be good if we're talking the same language and we
Yeah.
are clear with each other's definitions at least.
yeah.
Okay?
Yes. We will do. We will lead it. So, anyway, so envision star ratings calculated by a table.
You opened the last page and you started by apologizing. I don't know what you were apologizing
I'm
about.
apologizing because Marcel didn't update the table yet. Should have been there already.
Oh, it's okay.
So,
Shows what we have. So
So this is some of the criteria, and going back to the other one is kind of where the state is for the.
well, that's not even a calculated state.
It's
So
not
that's why
that. This is
it's not-
purely.
This was a projection of my mind, which I thought would be okay.
That's okay, but you can still tell us how this is, how you envision this.
Right, that's why I wanted to explain. So envision, you see the stars there, right? And the stars are calculated at the back by a table where we go through the whole SoC of the board and we make checks what works and what doesn't work. And there's a smart formula, there are some blocking criteria and so on
And mostly
that
automated.
makes them up. Right, exactly. and each of, in this table where you have all the components, each of those check marks will come out of the 1 to n tests that can either be manually or automatically executed,
Okay.
right? So you can envision that those are
Now-
3 tables, 3 layers.
Now, this is sort of at the crux of the question. I don't think you want to provide
Don't start with the star rating now. Yeah, other sessions
We're
about
not-
it.
Session's over.
So, just to make the point.
I'm not going to complain about the star rating. I'm not going to talk about how this ties into how you do the release process.
Right, and the release process is, that's what I'm supposed to explain. I already tried to explain it before. I wanted to make another point, how we kill our QA tracker with that.
Okay.
So there would be a table in the back where you get all the checkboxes, validation, farm, flows, basically submits the automated test results and checks all the stuff up. And then for the stuff we don't have automated tests for, we would ask for manual testing to fill those out.
And they can
Basically, in some kind of form, but this is basically in a different table that is made up of all the tests. Then we have the calculated star rating, and our QA would rather be filling up this table from what is not already automatically testing. And in the end, for release, that comes and gives you a sign-off, basically. This was just the point, and definitely the first step for sure, but it's something in the long run that might make sense.